From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Are we in danger of losing bees altogether because of colony collapse? Why is raw honey different and better than what we find in little plastic bears on the supermarket shelves? And if we want to help bees, does that mean we all need to become beekeepers? This is episode 520, and our guest today is Nathalie B. Nathalie is the creator and owner of Be Mindful, a full-service beekeeping company that offers a comprehensive and wide range of services, including beekeeping apprenticeships and workshops in sustainable and natural beekeeping situations, as well as offering affordable, practical horizontal hives and treatment-free bees. Nathalie today goes over the amazing benefits of honey and how we can help bees, and no, we don't have to all become beekeepers to do so. And she goes over why she's not particularly worried about colony collapse either. That said, she explains how we can get going if we want to start a small apiary in our backyard or rooftop, and what we can do to support the natural bees in our environment, whatever we do. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. Did you know it's only $30 for the year? Yes, using the code POD10. And when you join hands with us, you continue our important work of education, research, and activism. And on this, our 25th anniversary of the Weston A. Price Foundation, you can become eligible to win some prizes from Wise Traditions friendly companies. Just go to westonaprice.org, click on the Why Join button, and then join us, again, using the code POD10. It's only $30 for the year, and you just might win a little something something. Thank you in advance, and welcome to the family. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Nathalie.
Thank you so much, Hilda. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I have heard you say before that bees don't read the books. What do you mean by that?
So because we know quite a bit about bees, but not everything that the bees actually do in real life. And very often we'll find ourselves confronted to situations that we didn't expect because the books were saying one thing, and that's what all the beekeepers are repeating. But then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where the bees are doing the complete opposite. So that's kind of one of my favorite things to say. The bees don't read the books. They really don't.
I love it. And can you give us an example of something that was surprising that you encountered that wasn't in the books?
So one of my favorite things that happened to me a handful of times, actually, and I do a lot of bees, so it's not very common. But everybody tells you when you keep bees that there's only one queen, and then there's 60,000 workers, and maybe at times 10, 15,000 drones, the boys. And the queen does everything, and she's kind of like the egg layer and the glue, the cohesive actor of the colony. And some of the things that happens when there's a swarm, and the colony will raise several queen cells. The first one that gets out after the old mother queen is gone is supposed to either kill the other queens in their cells, or if there's several emerging at once, they will fight to the death, Game of Thrones style. But what we don't tell you in beekeeping classes is that actually very often there's something called supersedure, where you have a mother-daughter team that's making up for the lost ground of the failing queen. And they made a new queen with a daughter, but they're not replacing her quite yet because together they're stronger. And so you can find two queens in the colony at times. And what the reason why people don't realize that is very often when you're looking for your queen and you find her, you stop looking and you don't realize there might be another queen. So there's signs that tell you sometimes you can tell, well, I think there's been a supersedure. I bet I can find a queen. And this happened to me like a handful of times. And it's always so magical because it's like mind-boggling how they don't read the books and they do it their way.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So today we're going to cover a little bit about bees and their lives and the things that they don't do by the books, which I love. I also want to talk to you about honey and how we can make sure to find unadulterated raw honey and why that matters. And then a little bit about your own story. But so let's start with how people say we should thank the bees for our food. Can you explain why that is, Nathalie?
Because that, in the grand scheme of things, with the way our food system is set up these days, we went away from a local, crops and just growing our food next to ourselves in our gardens. And we kind of like delegated all that to big corporations overall. And they're doing the big monoculture and the whole crops across California. And it's been centralized. It's been basically everything is a lot bigger. And because of it, they're having a hard time pollinating those crops. So they bring in cart from all over the country thousands and thousands and thousands of bees to those big crops when they're in season in order to get them pollinated because there's not enough pollinators locally. Plus, they use a lot of pesticides and things.
Oh, there's so many factors, but it has never crossed my mind until you just said it, that when we do this monoculture situation where it's all like a whole field of, let's just say carrots, for example, or what have you, then there simply aren't enough bees to pollinate all of that produce. So they've got to import bees. And so it's a whole kind of artificially constructed situation. No wonder it's difficult for the bees to survive and for the crops to do well. Is that right?
Yes, it's stressful for the bees, not only for the transportation and the stress we're putting them through, but also we use a whole lot more pesticides and fungicides and all kinds of stuff to keep the weeds out. And that puts them under more stress. And there's a lot of basically poisonous environment going on when we do it that way.
So you're throwing this term around, there's stress for the bees, there's stress for the bees. But what if someone was like, show me the data? Like, what are you talking about? Where is the proof that bees are stressed? What would you say?
Well, there's data out there between the Bee Informed Partnership and the Honeybee Coalition and other organizations that are collecting data, even the USDA, about what the average rate of loss for colonies of bees is year to year. And it's about 50% these days. Yeah,
50%.
It's huge. Yes.
And how long did bee colonies used to live?
So colonies of bees can survive about 7-8 years in the wild, but because of the way we're putting them to work, it tends to be there's a lot of factors that come into play. And if you think that the colony is centered around the queen, these days commercial beekeepers are replacing their queens every year, and maybe even in some instances every 6 months, because they're under so much stress mostly from pesticides. Beekeeper applied pesticides too. So that's something that your listeners might not be aware of, is that 90-something% of beekeepers use basically poisons, pesticides into the hive to keep pests at bay.
As if the bees couldn't do it themselves?
Thank you. This is my whole thing. So the bees can learn to do it themselves. The problem is when you put them under commercial conditions and there's a lot of stress, and the way you raise queens, the bees suffer a lot. And so they're not in the best of situations. And that's why this is happening.
And that's why they have to keep replacing the queen, because it's like they're getting queen burnout situation.
Queen burnout, queen has been damaged by the pesticides. They were not necessarily as well mated. They use a process called grafting, which in a nutshell is that you are mass producing queens under less than ideal conditions. But it's easier for them to sell queens that way and replace queens that way. So you have a little bit less than ideal conditions, and that's part of the problem as well.
Oh my goodness. So beekeepers, Nathalie, their name sounds like they are protecting them, which I guess some of these conventional approached people are. Like they're thinking, oh, let's keep the pests at bay. And but unintentionally, it sounds like they are hurting the bees.
So certain practices, I would not generalize, but certain practices do hurt the bees. And you have a lot of really mindful beekeepers or well-intended beekeepers that are taking those stressors into account and trying to minimize that pressure on the honeybees. And so 94% of beekeepers out there are really small scale backyard beekeepers. You have about 1% of commercial beekeepers, and that they do represent the vast majority of the colonies that are being kept in the United States, but there are very few of them. So there's all kinds of things that come into play here. And backyard beekeepers don't transport their bees, but they do rely on the commercial beekeeping companies to source their bees and their queens, and they rely on them to educate them as well. So there's a little bit of cross-pollination, if you like.
That's a cute way of putting it. But it sounds like if I wanted to start backyard beekeeping, I would probably get my bees from some conventional thing, not even realizing that certain bees are bred a certain way. Tell me how I could be more judicious when I make those decisions.
So I would look into non-commercial hives to start with, because you can put the bees under a lot of stress just by the simple selection of the boxes that you put them in. So there's things like horizontal hives, and especially horizontal top-bar hives that are frameless. They rely on natural comb, and the methods are much more bee-friendly, bee-centric. And so if you care about that kind of stuff, I highly encourage you to look that up. And actually, we have some free plans to make hives on our website. They take about 2 hours. It's super easy, very not intimidating, and they're available for free. So anybody that wants to try to look into that, that's one way to look at it. The other thing I would say is be careful where you source your bees from and ask the right questions. So it's the same thing for honey, by the way. When you are purchasing bees or honey from a beekeeper, I highly encourage you to ask, what do you treat your bees with? So what that does is that when a beekeeper is naturally treating and just kind of using those conventional approaches, they will be very happy to tell you what they're using, because they're proud of the, kind of things that they do to help the bees. But then the people that do not treat will be very happy to tell you as well. If you ask, do you treat or do you not treat, they will get a little suspicious, and they will say, well, I'm not really treating, or I'm using organic treatments, which by the way are very caustic. So you gotta have to ask the right questions. That will also tell you if the bees that you're purchasing are going to be naturally resilient and naturally resistant to the pests, right? So if they're treated all the time, they're not adapted to doing well on their own without those pesticides. They're dependent on those pesticides. But if those bees are naturally raised without any poisons, then they are stronger, and you don't need to put those poisons in the hive. Does it make sense?
Yes, I'm thinking about how we domesticate animals. Let's say we have animals in a zoo. You can't just release them to the wild because they're not accustomed to fending for themselves.
Correct.
They've become dependent on the zookeeper, for example, to providing the prey. It's not like they even have to hunt anything down, right? So bees could be similarly domesticated and unable to fend for themselves in some ways.
Yeah, so it's basically their health would suffer. They're still free. So bees are a very particular animal that we keep, quote unquote, as livestock, because they really are free to go and fly to go fetch their food, and they can take off anytime they want to. We can't keep them bound to the box. That's their, they stay because they've raised babies and they've raised their comb there, and they were like, well, we have a home, but they're free to leave anytime. It's not like a cow, right? That's in a field and can't escape or something. And they don't depend on us for food, as opposed to a lot of the animals that we keep as livestock, where we have to take care of them and feed them and everything. So it's kind of a semi-wild animal, as opposed to most of the livestock that we keep.
Have you always been a bee girl?
No, I used to work for corporate. I have, I've done the, graduate school, MBA, corporate consultant, all this stuff, and even started when I got tired of that, I started a French conversation school, because I don't know if you can hear my accent, but I'm not from around here. So I started getting a little bit some experience with my own business. And from there, at some point, I got a beehive when I was for Christmas. I got a present of a beehive and bees that would come in the spring. And that's because I had, when I was 8 years old, written a report about the waggle dance and the communication language of the bees. And it stayed with me. It was absolutely fascinating. And that's kind of how it kind of came to fruition. At some point when I turned, I think about 40, I got my first beehive. And then it's just, I warn people when they want to start keeping bees, be forewarned, this is a highly addictive activity. And if you get, bit by the bug, literally, that's pretty much something that you're going to keep with you for the rest of your life. It's just very fascinating.
So can you keep bees anywhere? If I was like, okay, I'm so inspired, I'm going to build a little apiary. I'm going to start small, take the free instructions from your website and even if I'm in the city, I can build a beehive and get going.
Yes, you could do that. So bees, again, they forage in a radius of 1 mile on average, maybe 3 when they don't have as much. And that means they don't stay on your land. Very often they will go forage everywhere around. You could have them on the rooftop. You could have them on a balcony. You don't have to have a yard. Now, you have to be careful that you don't turn them into a nuisance to your neighborhood, because then people will get upset. But the beauty of those horizontal hives, they don't even look like hives. So people barely even know. And I'm big on saying, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission when it comes to that.
Oh, and what people might not realize is what they're considering a nuisance is essential. And this takes us back where we started the conversation, Nathalie. Like, we need the bees for food, because what happens if crops and produce isn't pollinated? What happens?
So there's a say that we would lose about a third of our food sources, or maybe even 2/3, and then eventually humankind would disappear if we didn't have the honeybees to pollinate. In all reality, that's a little bit exaggerated. As far as colonies of honeybees, they're not the only ones that pollinate our crops, right? But in the grand scheme of things, even though there's a rate of loss yearly average for the honeybee colonies in the United States of almost about 50%, beekeepers have learned to multiply them back, and bees swarm all the time. And what people don't know is that there's about 2 to 3 times the amount of bees in the wild that they are under our own management. So
wait, can you repeat that? There are 2 to 3 times. Oh, 2 to 3 times bees in the wild than there are bees that are in our specific little hives.
Correct. So we're not the only source of honeybee colonies. And they swarm, their whole purpose is reproduction, like every living organism. Our whole purpose is reproduction, passing our genes down the next generations, right? And so honeybees do that through swarming, which is colony fission, which is basically, just think of it it splits itself into similar organisms, where the mother queen leaves with a bunch of the bees and start another nest somewhere else, where the initial colony gets new fresh queens, the daughters of the mother that left, and they inherit the nest, but with better chances of survival. So yes, the swarm will have only 20% chance of survival. The mother colony will have 80% chance of survival. But in grand scheme of things, it kind of all evens out between the losses and the gains. And you have a population that is fairly stable despite the losses that beekeepers are experiencing. So we're in danger of losing a lot of the bees and the diversity and a lot of pollinator power, not just with our colonies of honeybees, but with all our bees. And there's a lot more native bees and things like that in the environment than they are really honeybees.
Gray-toed tallow. At Gray-toed tallow, they believe that truly nourishing skincare begins with the finest ingredients. That's why their top priority is to source only the best, 100% pasture tallow from organically raised animals. The result is a clean product with just a few ingredients, reminiscent of what past generations relied on for healthy skin. At Gray-toed Tallow, they also strive to keep the wholesome products affordable, making it more accessible for those seeking natural skincare solutions. And hey, life is busy. They know that they can do the work for you, transforming suet into tallow and a tallow balm that your skin will love. Cherished for generations, tallow naturally offers a perfect blend of fats and vitamins to keep your skin healthy, hydrated, and radiant. Visit greytoadtallow.com today to explore their full range of products designed to nurture your skin from head to toe. And use the code WISE10 at checkout to save 10% off your order. Again, that's greytoadtallow.com and the code WISE10 at checkout to save 10% on your order. And experience the difference that Grey Toad Tallow can make. And One Earth Health. Are you feeling run down, struggling with focus, joint pain, or weak immune system? You might be missing something crucial, real nutrient-dense organ meats. That's where One Earth Health comes in. Their 100% New Zealand grass-fed beef organs are the most potent you'll find anywhere. And why? Because New Zealand has the highest farming standards in the world, producing organ meats with superior vitamins and minerals. One of their customers noticed her joints felt stronger. She could climb the stairs with ease again. And her husband, better digestion. And her son, he finally had the focus to power through his schoolwork. So, if you want more energy, stronger joints, and sharper focus, give One Earth Health beef organs a try. Go to oneearthhealth.com and for a limited time, use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order. Again, that's oneearthhealth.com and for a limited time, use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order. Fuel your body the way nature intended. One Earth Health, because quality matters.
Why is raw honey like the ultimate? In my mind, it's kind of like raw milk. It's very different than the product we see on the supermarket shelves. Can you explain why?
Okay, so honey is, I call it liquid gold and liquid sunshine, is basically a superfood. It has got a lot of really interesting properties that also make it a medicine in a way. It has antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, and antimicrobial properties. It contains a certain level of hydrogen peroxide. It is a great substance to use on wounds of all kinds, burns. It helps with healing. It helps with disinfecting your wound. It can help with like styes and pink eye and strep throat. It helps with your gut. It helps with your brains. It's an amazing substance. We don't have a lot of studies about it yet, but it's a substance that not only has all those that bioactivity level, but it also has a lot of nutritional benefits, including somewhat probiotics, but mostly it has almost every nutrient that we would need for the most part, except maybe proteins for sustaining life for extended periods of times. And it's, I believe it's even one of the foods that we use when the elderly is unable to really eat very well, and you dilute it with water and you can feed people that way for a while because it contains a lot of macro and micronutrients, including vitamins and minerals and enzymes and everything that's really good for us.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because even if you said it's understudied to a degree, if you go back, as I understand it, to ancient cultures and study, for example, the Egyptians, didn't they have evidence that honey was kept in some of even the tombs? Like it was that important in the culture for nutrients and so forth.
They were using it for embalments and they knew the healing properties of honey and its nutritional properties. And that research might have been empirical. They learned through experience, but I think that it would behoove us to have a lot more research into the properties of honey for healing and all kinds of things. But you were asking about the grocery store honey, and I want to make a point that what you find in the grocery store honey is often not the kind of honey that I'm referring to. It doesn't necessarily come straight from a hive. And very often, actually, it's the second most adulterated food in the world behind olive oil.
Wow.
And so what you find a lot of is honey that's been mixed and diluted with rice syrup, high fructose corn syrup, or things like that. and then it tastes a little bit of honey goes a long way for it to taste like honey. But you can tell it tastes like syrup as well. It's very sweet, and it's not. A lot of people say, "Oh, I don't like honey. I don't like honey," and then they try honey straight from the hive, and their mind is blown. And it's like, I've never had this. This is so good. But
it's kind of like the difference between a grocery store tomato and a tomato straight off the vine. It's like two completely different foods. But my question to you, Nathalie, is don't they have to put on the little bare bottle that they've added something, or is it such an industry standard that apparently they don't even have to put it on the ingredient list?
So that's a great question. It's one of the least regulated industry in the United States. That there's really no guidelines. Anything goes. So you could see on a bottle raw local honey. It doesn't mean that it is raw local honey at all.
What?
You do not know any of it. People can tell you whatever they want. There's some requirements on the labeling for, like, as far as saying, well, not recommended for children under 1, or where it was bottled, which address, and things like that. But you're not sure what you're getting, really, unless you know you're a beekeeper or you have a good source. So look, to be in a grocery store, there needs to be a certain volume of honey that you produce, right? So the brands that you see there are not capable of sustaining and answering the demand unless they buy back and buy outside of unless they're a huge commercial beekeeper that produces a whole lot of honey. But here are some of the things that happen in the beekeeping world that you guys might not be aware of, is that there's a lot of what we call packer and basically people buy in bulk, and they can buy from abroad tank loads of quote unquote honey and repackage it or mix it with other things and repackage it. And a lot of beekeepers sell honey that's not theirs of their own. That happens a lot at the farmers market as well, by the way. Yeah.
So disappointing. Oh my goodness.
You were talking about the little bare plastic bottles. So a couple of things about that. Honey in plastic, honey has a certain acidity. I wouldn't put it in plastic to store it long term, first of all. Second of all, a lot of the grocery store honey that you see has been either pasteurized or heated to a certain extent to basically prevent it from getting crystallized. And that kills a lot of the enzymes that make it raw and then gives it a lot of its beneficial properties. So there's a lot of things that you kind of need to know. So what I would recommend is getting your honey from a local beekeeper that you actually know is producing all their own honey, but even go beyond that and ask, what do you treat your bees with? And do you heat your honey in any way, and at what temperature? So that you kind of know a little bit better what you're buying and what you're getting.
So let's say we don't aspire to have our own hives in the backyard or on the rooftop, and we do make these steps to get raw honey. What else can we actually do to help protect the bees? I know you said only 1/3 are kind of cultivated and the other 2/3 are kind of wild, but what can we do to help bees in general?
That's my favorite question. Thank you for asking it, Hilda. So we don't help the bees by becoming beekeepers. What we help the bees with is by planting. And so on our website, there's a planting list for Central Texas, for example, of pollinator-friendly plants that are local beekeepers and people that we recommend who are looking to help the bees. We point them to that. And it's a free download, and they go and they can kind of see what's going in the to grow in the area and help the bees, not just the honeybees, but all the native pollinators. And so planting is one of the things that you could do. If anybody has lists like that across the states, I would refer to that. The Xerces Society has some really good databases. There's some local nurseries that are really good at that. And then the other thing that you can do is avoid pesticides, glyphosates and neonicotinoids and things like that when you are growing your gardens. Just kind of be very particular. And then the third one is to share and educate your neighbors, because as it spreads through, the more we do that collectively as a community, the more we're helping all the pollinators.
Well, and what's interesting about glyphosate is you would think, the farms, the big CAFOs and the, monoculture crops and all those things, they're the ones using all the glyphosate. But no, the biggest
No.
users of
Mhm.
glyphosate are people with just backyard gardens or lawns that they're trying to preserve.
Yeah, and I'm not going to cite brands or anything, but we all know that, that's the typical culprits, the usual suspects there. So if we can
Yes.
reduce that and replace any kind of like herbicides with that contain toxic substances with things that are more neutral for the environments, like, I don't know, soap and water and maybe some vinegar and, not so much salt because that can kill the ground, but things that are a little bit more inoffensive or innocuous to the environment, that would be fantastic. And the other thing we could do is, instead of growing lawn and basically, so this is what I look at. I got people that are fertilizing, putting herbicides and all the stuff, and watering like crazy, and to grow grass, then they're going to spend a whole lot of time cutting after that, right? When we don't have that much water sometimes to squander on things like this. And so, what I recommend also is to try to go with native landscapes and xeriscapes, and things that don't require as much maintenance, that don't require fungicides, fertilizers, and all the stuff as well, and that provide food for the pollinators. I'm currently working with a project that's called Legalize Weeds. And it's talking about this exact thing. So we're encouraging people to grow their front yards and their gardens into native pollinator gardens. They're a little bit crazy, and that's okay. Let's just embrace that. Right.
I love that. I have a friend who has an ample backyard, and I can't tell you how much money and time and herbicides she's used to get rid of a particular plant. I think it's called vetch, actually.
Yes.
And I'm like, why don't you just? I haven't said this to her because, sometimes these subjects are a little sensitive, but I'm wondering why she doesn't just let it grow,
That's
But
food
because,
for the bees.
right, it's partially because we've got this mindset like weeds are bad, must eliminate. But who said so?
And who decides what a weed is? I mean, some of lamb's quarter, some people look at it as a weed. It's edible. It has all kinds of beneficial, micronutrients. I mean, we're all so focused on weeds are bad that we fail to recognize it's a part of life, and who has categorized them as weeds in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great question to ask ourselves. So, do you ever get any people who say to you, "Oh, Nathalie, you're just too into the bees. You've gone bee crazy. You're getting a buzz from the bees." No, I'm just kidding now, because you were talking about the weed thing. But do you get naysayers who think you're putting too much importance on bees and their future and our future?
Not directly. No, I think people actually respect that. And anybody that spends 5 minutes looking at the honeybees, especially, or bees in general, it's a fascinating world. And I think people respect that it can be very addictive. And we're doing a good thing overall, helping them out. So the only pushback, I think, and part of me is conscious and mindful of that, is the pressure that colonies of honeybees have been said to have sometimes on being competitive to other bees. So the way to get around that is to help those native bees in other ways by providing bee hotels and native bee, raising native bees as well, providing food for all of the bees, things like that.
So, if I do want to have a horizontal hive in my backyard, I should first observe the landscape and see what native bees are around. So there's not like this feeling that my bees are encroaching on their turf.
Yeah, so this whole thing, by the way, is a little a tug and pull. It's a just will have native pollinators everywhere, and while bees are very efficient at pollinating and collecting food because they're a super organism and they work in huge armies, right? So they're very, very efficient. They are also making the environment better because by pollinating all those trees much more efficiently, they're one of the only animals that are able to leave more than they've taken in their environment. You see an increase in flowering plants, and they're better able to fruit and grow offspring because of colonies of honeybees, which in turn makes more food for the other bees. So it's when I was talking about a pushback, I think that it's a a little overblown. I think that in the grand scheme of things, it's a give and take, and everything kind of finds a balance there.
Oh, okay. That's helpful. There's not going to be like a bee war in my backyard.
No, there's not going to be a bee war in your backyard. And I have much more bumblebees and things like that now that I have honeybees. So this kind of tells you, because everything is pollinating, and in the end, that's more food for all of them.
Oh, right. Just like they say, a coffee shop doesn't mind if another coffee shop comes nearby because you're bringing in more traffic. Absolutely. Exactly. Oh, that line is too long. I'm going to go to the other one.
Exactly.
Well, listen, we need to wrap up. This has been fascinating. Mm-hmm. I do want to ask you the question I love to pose at the end, that if the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, Nathalie, what would you recommend that they do?
So what I like to tell people is, and I'm not a medical doctor in any way, but what I do for improving my health every day is, before I go to bed, I take 2 tablespoons of raw honey that I know is raw honey without pesticides. And it feeds if you read a book called The Honey Revolution, it will tell you exactly why that is. But basically, my understanding is it bypasses the blood-brain barrier, and it goes straight to your brain, feeding your brain as you sleep, and helps with your nervous system and your brain health, as opposed to sugar that would get absorbed by all your other organs, your liver and everything. And it kind of like hogs it and leaves your brain to fend for itself. This does the opposite. And also it's good for your gut. So the book says it. I'm not, again, a doctor, but I believe in what it says. And basically it helps with things like Alzheimer's and neurological aging, basically. So that's what I would do. I would recommend try it, and you sleep better.
Yes.
So I would say try it at least. Yes.
And I was thinking at the very least, it'll give you sweet dreams, right?
Yeah. You get to. I love it. That's a great line.
All right. Well, Nathalie, it has been an absolute pleasure. On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Hilda. That was my pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you for having me.
Our guest today was Nathalie B. You can go to her website, be-mindful.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada Gore, the host and producer of this podcast on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for today's episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Pangea81 said this: I love this podcast. This podcast continues to help me understand my health and how important the correct foods and practices are to my daily life. I am an avid listener and a member. Thank you for continuing to bring me this information. You are so welcome. Thank you for not only listening, but becoming a member. Like I said earlier, membership really supports the work of the foundation. If you've benefited from this podcast, please join us. Just go to westonaprice.org, click on the Why Join button, and join us for only $30 for the year. I can't believe it's such a good deal. And you put in the code POD10, and that gives you that little $10 discount. And we welcome your membership and your joining hands with us. And like I said, because it's our 25th anniversary, you might just be winning a prize, because they're putting all of the names of the new members in a hat, and they're picking out some to win prizes as a thank you. And in the meantime, I thank you personally for listening. And stay well, my friend. Keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.